how, or rather, what would be the current model for a trauma, or current or more prevalent or widely accepted model for a trauma-informed preparation to being shocked. And remembering that shock is going to be facilitated by confronting something that is beyond an immediate range of control. In fact, it's a paradox. How do you prepare to be shocked when shock itself will be a dismantling of any previously held onto modes of being or responding? So what would be a widely acceptable model of a trauma-informed preparation to being shocked? And a real shock, right? When you know, shock is shock. I mean, certainly there can be dosages. You could have a micro dose of shock, and then depending on who you are, where you are, and other conditions, your constitution, etc., then you would get what you handle. You know the expression, you get what you handle. And then there would be possibly for some people a massive dose of shock. So what is the safe way to prepare for shock in a modernized culture? And feel free to ask me as well, from within my cultural framework, how I would prepare for shock, how I have prepared for shock, and how I would advise anyone listening to prepare.
I'm way more curious about your answer, so I will ask you. And I feel, I mean, of course, then preparation of the nervous system and nourishment and detox, etc. But to be honest, I do not feel so much like interest in now giving a smart or holistic answer or list of factors that you need to check in with. What I want to share are two things: a deep longing in me for experiencing such a framework as potentially the next animal that might get this shock. It's like an archetypical longing for, can I be safe with my death? Would I be welcomed again with dying, and not dying alone in the desert, but being held by you? And what comes to my mind is that there have been psychiatries, I think somewhere in the 70s in the US, but I'm not sure about these details, working with schizophrenia, and the only medicine that they had is holding people suffering from schizophrenia with their hands, holding the bodies in the space, like holding, like 20 people around, everybody holding a little bit with his or her hands of this trembling, overwhelmed nervous system with their hands, and just holding and holding and holding. So the whole body was embraced by so much presence and so much capacity to be there as a container. And the image that I have is then a whole body vibration that's completely out of control. It's completely out of control. It's shock. It's an impact that makes the individual container explode. And that's not a problem, because the container of space or universe or world or outer world is there and takes over seamlessly. And this is something that provokes such a longing in me, because I imagine myself being there, this whole body trembling happening, and not Elan anymore. And it would teach me that I can survive death, that it is okay to die. And if something can teach me that, it would teach me about my own inner freedom and invincibility on a level that's deeply coming from the wounding. I'm initiated to that through the shock. So maybe my whole answer is about this moment or image, and that in itself might tell a story of what's the biggest lack in my culture, and that is being touched in a safe and supportive and containing way while being in the freak out state or space. So being the center of attraction from beloved ones that I feel safe with, while I am internally absorbed by something that couldn't be far away from the official life. That is a pretty precise description for a framework that would fill a gap that I'm suffering from in this culture. And Uma,
yeah,
I mean, just please, I'm so curious about the aspects, the recipes, the tool set that you would share, just because I also know that you are kind of embodying cultures and many traditions that are mainly about how to provide frameworks for shocks if they come up or if they are considered as even necessary for certain paths.
Well, yes, and this is one of the many aspects I'm so grateful for when I turn to the traditions of Ayurveda, especially as they synergize with Tantra and yoga, is this primary recognition and honoring of how each of us are uniquely configured on elemental levels. And that for each of us, therefore, there would be a personalized solution. And that personalized solution would take into account the climate, the location, the current condition of that person, the age, the energy of the space, the capacity at that certain point in time to express directly what's going on in the inner world or not. So there would be a great slowing down to become more fully aware of all of these multiple factors that would even include taking the pulse of that person, possibly, to really be looking into the eyes, to really see the temperature change being reflected on the skin of the face, to note every different transmission, even as it changes, of these incredible experiences that are happening under the skin. So this is really very, very important, is who are we talking about? Who are we sitting with? Not just what, but who. What and who is this person experiencing? And then the framework will be adapted, because that framework is organic. The framework is directly based on the law and order of nature herself. So therefore, that framework will be organically adapted, adjusted for that person wherever they are. And then one can determine, prescribe, you might say, what techniques, what way of speaking, the tone, the pressure, the duration of time, and ultimately the dose. You know, what dosage of shock really is going to be digestible, because that would be another primary factor to take into account is what can be processed, what can be digested. And even before considering what is digestible, there would have to be historical intake of the existing condition. And the existing condition would very much be determined by how much waste product, how much latent or unprocessed toxicity is present in this person's tissues, is present in their way of being, that would first need to be broken down and eliminated. So the framework will be both related to therapeutic, medicinal, on a physical sense, on a psychological sense, on a spiritual sense, on an energetic sense, both seen, both unseen. So it really is to become fully present with each other and to have that sense, you know, the sense that we have all the time in the world for this. All the time in the world. And that there is no sense of rush. There is no fixed, standardized set of measurements that we have to squeeze ourselves into. So this is definitely a primary stage.
That's in itself the love for the individual factors and for how many factors matter. This in itself feels like a declaration of love to the preciousness of this process, to the worthiness of this process, and to the worthiness of every individual being that perfectly supported. It's in itself such an appreciative science, figuring out the impact of so many factors with so much,
yes,
obsession.
Passion. And then they would also have to be, therefore, a capacity to respond to all those factors accordingly without a conditioned, polarized, preferential, biased, programmed reactivity. So therefore, some people may need at some points, in some places, need to be held, need to be touched, need to be supported in that way, to have the safety, the warmth, the certainty, the slowness, the softness, the fullness. And some people, depending on who they are at that given point and time, depending on their condition, depending on the toxicity, whether it has been cleared, depending on the capacity, their capacity in their sense organs and their mind, etc., as an instrument, they may respond more to spaciousness, not being held. They would respond more to isolation, to be left alone on a mountain peak, whipped by winds, with no certain hope of rescue. And that will be exactly the expression of being seen. That would be truly being allowed, truly being trusted. And so there will be, and as I said earlier, for every person there is a path, and that path will change depending on the condition and the capacity of the person we're talking about to digest, process, eliminate, assimilate, and ultimately embody the fruit, the fruition of that process.
What's so outstanding for me when I listen to your words and description is how much in my culture, for example, I refer to the word path as a kind of stay here and you manage your way to somewhere else, almost like the world is happening somewhere else. And what you describe is like everything in this world might be needed at a certain point. So that's so fascinating. It's so foreseeable and so unforeseeable at the same time. It's like, I do not know what you have to do. You might dive in the ocean. You might fast. You might eat too much. You might, whatever it is, every aspect in this world is a potential aspect of potential medicine composition for you in certain times. We do not know, but we know exactly how to know it when it's there. So that's a fascinating union of structure and surrender into the total unknown every time anew. It's such a mastery of listening, or almost guiding by following. It's amazing.